Good morning, Dr. A. This video presentation is meant to also accompany the PowerPoint slides that I am attaching in the assignment folder too. They are basically a collection of articles, content from social media, and pictures that illustrate what I'm talking about. So the presentation portion is going to answer all of the questions that we were asked. And the first one is, how has your understanding of deviance changed over the semester? And basically my understanding of deviance went from not really thinking about it very much to thinking about it in terms of a spectrum, where at one end of the spectrum is socially unacceptable behavior, and at the other end of the spectrum is deviant behavior that is criminal. So I depicted that in my PowerPoint using things that, like, how deviance has kind of changed as a culture, how we perceive certain behaviors. They used to be deviant and now they're not, and behaviors that used to be socially acceptable and now they're not. And so I wanted to talk a little bit too about the social learning theory and social bonding, self-control, and life course theories. So book definition saying that social structure and the differences in social structure where social learning takes place causes the outcome of either deviant behavior or conforming behavior. And I think all of these theories together, like, they kind of build upon each other, and parts of one theory help explain parts of another theory. That's why I kind of grouped them all together. They describe the bonds that affect the development of youth. So youth, when they are growing up and they attach themselves to a person that they admire and respect, and they want to internalize the behavior of the person that they respect, whether that person is a good person or is not a good person, that is related to their life trajectory, and if they're on a course of conforming behavior or deviant behavior. And then also the self-control theory about if a person has high self-control correlating to being on a path of conforming behavior versus a person who has low self-control being on a path of deviant behavior, and where that comes from, how a person develops self-control if they are raised in an environment where they are nurtured during childhood and trained or taught discipline, that results in whether or not they have self-control. The next question, given what you have learned about deviance, and theory in this class, what do you think should be the relationship between deviance and social control? Well, some deviant behaviors, they're criminal and they harm other people, and we absolutely as a culture need to institute and have in place formal social control that prohibits people or causes people to kind of rethink that behavior based on the consequences. And then other things like informal social control for behaviors that don't harm other people, but maybe we don't really want to see them in public, like people putting their feet on the table of a restaurant or something. What are some of the problems with our current system of social control of deviance? I think the biggest problem in our culture is the lack of emphasis on education, the access to education, the funding of education. All of these things together, I think, creates the problems, that a lot of them that we have in our culture today. Throughout history, research has concluded that successful societies were and are educated societies. So I put in my PowerPoints, I put an excerpt from the video, or from the kids movie Matilda. This kind of sums up how I think a lot of our culture feels about education. Which of these theories we studied do you think is the best to analyze our current system of social control and of deviance itself? Totally the Marxist and conflict theory. I think that, along with labeling theory, both those together very, very adequately explain what we have going on in our culture today. So book definition, Marxist theory, because our capitalist system creates or makes easy for those in power to create inequalities or exploit existing inequalities, and they use divisive issues to distract the proletariat. If those in power label teens or kids as deviant, which I think is a lot of what happens, and they use forms of discrimination to keep them divided as older teens and young adults, we who are divided aren't going to be able to fight the exploitation as a group. We don't have the ability to unite and come together to fight the inequalities against us. So some of the things I put in my PowerPoint about this were links and articles to the Centoya Brown case, and also to links and articles to the police abuse of power, using their badge and authority to abuse vulnerable populations, such as like prostitutes and people being arrested for alcoholism, or in the case of the one that I put in there, a woman had admitted herself to a hospital for alcoholism, and the emergency room called the police because they believed she was stealing, and that cop took it upon himself to rape her while she was in handcuffs. Next question. If you were asked to build a better vision of social control, what would your philosophy be? Well, I already mentioned education, and I also think the reform of prisons and the legislation bias that we have within our laws would be a huge impact on our culture for positive change. The policy changes that could be brought about if we focus on how our laws are biased to disadvantaged populations would directly impact the lives of millions of people, giving them the chance to live without fear. And it would open employment and educational opportunities they don't currently have. What behaviors would I focus on? What behaviors would I allow? What would you focus on, informal or formal social controls? Would you make peace or war? When I mentioned education earlier, I mentioned it in the form of informal social control, and I hate to make it sound like we're going to just brainwash the masses, because that's kind of what that sounds like, but I don't believe it is. I believe it is education, and the emphasis of education would be an informal social control in the way that people learning the truth about things. It would create tolerance and understanding. The other thing that I would focus on is religion, and I looked up the sociological perspectives on religion because I see religion as it negatively impacts our culture, which aligns with the social conflict Marxist theory. However, I did look at Durkheim's structural functionalism meaning of religion, that religion's purpose provides societal cohesion through rituals and values, social control in a good way because people are they behave well because they're in fear of falling out of God's graces, and it provides a meaningful purpose in life. Marxist theory, it actually, like I said, I agree with that one. It entrenches existing inequalities, creating and exacerbating social stratification. Those in power can frame existing inequalities as part of a divine path. So what does that mean? Like the Calvinist version of Christianity, they believe in predestination. So they believe if you're rich, it's because God predestined it that way. If you're poor, well, he predestined it that way. That's just the way it works. So in closing, I for this question, I believe that education as a form of informal social control can help get rid of the negative impact that religion and its social controls has had on our culture, like racism and oppression, which is evident of the big five world religions throughout history. That's something that I linked in my an article in my PowerPoint presentation as well. As education goes up, religious devotion goes down. Not necessarily spirituality and the connection to something greater than ourselves here on this planet, but the adherence to religious legalism goes down as education goes up. Thank you.